The MAT Unpacked, the podcast where we open up what good really looks like in a multi-academy trust. In each episode, Chris Whiting from Academy Advisory will be joined by trust leaders and specialists to share real stories, practical lessons, and usable advice to help you run stronger trusts and improve outcomes for learners. Welcome to another episode of The MAT Unpacked. My name's Ed. I am asking the questions, but alongside me, giving the expert knowledge, is Chris Whiting from Academy Advisory. How are we doing, Chris?
Very well, thanks, Ed. And today we're at Activate Learning at UTC Reading.
We are. We're on the road again. And introduce our guest.
Our guest today is Chief Executive of Activate Learning Education Trust, or ALET, an internal client of ours, and really interested to talk about how she's built the capacity for really good leadership and consistency of approach as well within her organisation, which I'd like to share with everyone today.
Excellent. Joe, are you a podcast veteran, or is this your first experience of doing something like this?
I've done one or two, but
Okay.
I wouldn't say I was a veteran.
Fair enough. Well, the topic for this particular episode is building capacity for effective leadership, which, I mean, it's quite the title to start with already. What does that phrase mean to you in the reality, in the day-to-day of running a multi-academy trust?
Well, I think first and foremost, whenever you're talking about the capacity for anything, you've got to start thinking about what you've got the resources for. And that'll be the financial and human resources, how we make the most of our financial resources whilst not disempowering our human resources. And what I mean by that is there are various ways of running a multi-academy trust. You can centralise everything, or you can decentralise more. And I think Chris and I have been having conversations about more and more trusts are going towards a centralised route. What we've tried to do there is think about how we can make the most of our financial resources without pulling lots of finances out of schools to be able to run the leadership of a multi-academy trust. And really appreciate that the leadership of any multi-academy trust is more than the central team, the CEO, that particular office space. And that actually empowering our leaders and training and developing our leaders from within all aspects of our trust is how I think we've built the capacity. Because I think there's a risk in the early days of building multi-academy trusts of taking the capacity out and disempowering leaders by centralising things. And what we've really tried hard to do is centralise where it makes good sense and build the human capacity and talent development across all aspects of our leadership, which includes leadership of teaching and learning in the classroom. So every aspect.
That's really interesting, Chris, because that's the theme that's come up quite a lot, hasn't it, about managing centrally or how much power you're giving to each. It seems to be, I mean, obviously you're in a lot of multi-academy trusts, so you must see that quite a lot.
We do, and it's one of those sort of perennial questions, where does the divide between responsibilities in a school and the central team? And actually, by blurring that, I think you get a better outcome, because rather than feeling tribal or departmental about an academy, you start acting like one organisation, which I think is really important. And there's also a financial benefit to it, of course, because when you're going, I'm going to build my central team, of course, it costs money. But the people within the academies are already on the payroll. And it's about investing in people as well. Some of the work that we've done recently, as part of the audit work with Joe, has been on succession planning. And it's so important. What Joe's done really well, I think, and ALET's done really well, is invested in people that have come through the organisation that then can be the deputies, that then can be the head teachers, that then move into central positions. And everyone understands the ethos, because they're not thinking about centre academy, they're thinking ALET, obviously with their individual learners and then their needs and that contextual stuff safeguarded and looked after. But you appreciate your one organisation working to help each other.
It's an interesting one. I mean, I guess as a leader, it must be tough sometimes to kind of let go, because you kind of want to be across everything. But I guess that sort of scale you're working on, that's almost impossible, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, pretty difficult. And I would argue that if you know the detail of everything, you're probably not doing the strategic role you should be doing in the role that I occupy. But what I really make a very conscious effort to do is to make sure that I know the key indicators and key metrics, and I talk to as many people as I can when I'm around the schools, so that I get a feeling, it's a triangulated feeling of where things aren't quite working the way we would like. And then I'll go and dive in deep into those areas if that is where I think that we need to have some improvements. Our trustees, or my chair of trustees, quite regularly says, "Joe, what's your next hobby?" i.e., what are you going to lead now, Joe? But that's actually a really important aspect of the role. You that traditional leadership, helicopter view of the role that I occupy as a CEO, but then being able to go in deep where it's needed to see how we can make some operational and organisational efficiencies and change.
So kind of going to the nuts and bolts of it, really. If you're talking sort of leadership and structures, you're talking people, cultures, systems. Is there one that's more important than the other, or do they all just equal in terms of the importance of them?
I would argue that culture is the single most important aspect of any organisation. And for ALAT, we've been really quite acutely aware of that from the very beginning. Our learning philosophy, when we're thinking about that brain emotion motivation element of everything that you do, that intrinsically has human behaviours built into it. And something which I've had to accept, which has been a really difficult thing for me to accept across the organisation, is human beings have a need to belong. And it's okay that human beings identify with the school that they go to every day and feel that that's where they belong, and don't feel that intrinsic full-on belonging to a trust. And I've had to learn to accept that to some extent.
Okay,
and I
yeah.
think it's a real battle that CEOs of multi-academy trusts have. We want everybody to understand the one organisation, the one trust, you belong to this trust. And yes, you do. You do your employment contracts, the policies, everything we do as a belonging of that one organisation. But it's quite normal to feel that my belonging is where I come to work and the people I interact with, and I belong in this team. Everybody finds the teams they belong in, and that's human nature. And I think that really speaks to the culture that we've tried to develop, and an understanding of how human beings operate and what people as individuals need to be able to do their best job. And that is feeling part of a really strong team, being managed by leaders who understand it, get them, understand the high expectations. And then you bring all of those aspects together. The one thing that we're really confident of and talk about a lot in our trust is our learning philosophy and our attributes. Everything we do, our appraisal process, all of our policies are built around that central thing. And that's what we all belong to in the trust.
From your experience then, Chris, I mean, it's interesting in terms of there's no right way necessarily, I assume, of running a multi-academy trust.
Absolutely isn't. No one single right way.
And you've probably seen it done in many, many different ways. So, I mean, I don't know, from your experience, you're going to go, is it what is right for that trust? Is it what's right for the individual schools as part of the trust? I don't know what the answer to that question is necessarily.
It's wider than that as well. It's what's right for the communities that they sit within, and the demographics and the challenges that they have. It's also down to the finance as well, because the case sometimes you can't build what you really need. You can build as good as you can get with the resources and the people that you have. But I think if you're honest about the challenges and you communicate effectively and you try to act as one team, it's interesting what Joe said about it's okay to belong to the school, and that I completely agree with that. One thing I was quite interested in is particularly the people that are, so the senior leaders, the ones that have got a dual role, I suppose, or at least that they understand the trust ethos more. How do you see that sort of blurring at that point where they start to feel like they belong to both?
Yeah, I think that absolutely is the case. One of the things that we do is whenever there is a leadership appointment, myself or my deputy is always involved in that leadership appointment, because we want to make sure that we're appointing leaders to schools and the trust that understand their role for the community that they're going to, the school community that they're going to work in most of the time, but understand that actually they are leaders of a wider organisation and the trust. And that they understand that it is a dual role and accept that on appointment. We've also worked incredibly hard around empowering our head teachers to be responsible for what they deliver in their schools for their communities. But also those head teachers come together as part of the school improvement team. The head teachers are part of the school improvement team for the trust. They meet every other week and they talk about, with an openness of academic data, financial data and performance across their schools. They accept where they are, they support each other, they're involved in quality reviews right the way across the trust. And that then means that you've got empowered to deliver to their community, but a real ownership of the leadership across the trust as well.
Let's go on to our next question then. So, I mean, ALET's got a really distinctive identity around transforming lives through learning. We've got lots of it on the wall as well through here in terms of brain, emotions, motivation. It's clearly something you live and breathe. So how does that translate into leadership, into everything you do, I suppose?
Yeah, so we're really clear about that transforming lives, but through the learning environments that we provide. And the learning philosophy is a huge part of that. So we very much think about, for every student, every member of staff, everybody that interacts with us, having a real understanding of how our trust can transform through the learning in terms of brain development, through knowing individuals and what motivates them. And that for us is a key, almost differential for us, we feel, than lots of other trusts. And that motivation comes down to, what is it that you want to do next? And that isn't targets as in, I'd like to get a grade 8 in my maths. It is, what do you want to be doing when you're 30, 40, 50? And children at 15 can't articulate that, obviously.
Yeah, that's quite a hard thing to imagine, I guess.
So we help them to think about people like them. How can we get our alumni back who are working in spaces that they can recognise? And then think, well, yes, I can do that. I can actually, I can see it, I can feel it, I can do it. And particularly for our most vulnerable and disadvantaged students, that's particularly important, because they don't always have in their home life the adults around them doing those roles that can role model. So it's really important for us to role model that, to give that motivation and raise aspirations that way. And then the final part around the emotions, we've just talked about human beings and belonging. Well, that for me is all about that emotional side. You know, how are you as an individual? How are your team performing together? How do those two people have an argument and resolve it in a team? Because let's face it, that happens.
Of course.
It's the how you resolve it which says whether you've got a strong culture or not, and therefore you can then go on to transform lives. So our strapline and our strategy is all about transforming lives through learning to ensure successful lives and careers. So it is the lives and careers, and ensuring that people have the skill set and the attributes to be able to go and take anything. And, you know, the world is changing quickly, careers change quickly. Something they do at 18 might not even exist by the time they're 21. Yeah. So we've got to, you know, employers are saying to us, we want the students to have attributes and skills that mean that they can change and develop and be resilient and work in a team and critically analyse, because, you know, with AI and everything, you know, things change so quickly. They've got to know how to ask the right question and then check that it is giving the right answer that you're looking for, and keep interrogating. So it's those skills that we're being asked to develop by employers, and employers are saying to us, we want to employ your children because you are working on this specifically. And that is how we feel that we do the transforming life through learning. Wider than just the qualifications. Qualifications are important, they open doors, but it's actually that wider skill that will get them further on after that.
Interesting. I mean, I think we're going to touch more on that in the next episode, aren't we? We'll talk more about those connections to industry and kind of how you build that. One of the key parts of this episode is those difficult moments that you face. And I know UTC Reading received a really challenging Ofsted report in 2023 after previously being judged outstanding. And I know that was quite a shock at the time, wasn't it? I mean, how did you personally respond to that judgment? I mean, I guess really there's a lot of sort of soul searching, I guess, to you know, it's quite a moment, isn't it, when you suddenly that lands on your desk and you're like, well, here we are.
Especially if I can just come in, that Reading was, I think, the first UTC that received an outstanding before that. So it sort of compounds the challenge, I suppose, in terms of background.
Well, personally, I mean, it was a very personal thing for me because UTC Reading, I was the founding principal. I took it to that position that Chris just described as the first outstanding UTC. And I suppose from a personal perspective, it was difficult. It was a very emotionally loaded time. You worry about how everybody's going to judge you, from people you've never met outside to, you know, your own family, the trustees, the leaders in other schools, and that's quite difficult. But to some extent, I think you've got a decision to make when something goes difficult in that respect. You can either become defensive and fight it, or you can accept that something isn't going right and start to deal with it straight away. And, you know, like every other leader, that was a decision to take. And actually, on day 2 of the Ofsted inspection, we were already really in day 1 of the improvement plan. You know, we'd pretty much, myself and the chair of trustees, I discussed it. We were here on day 2 together, working with the lead inspector, and we were already talking about what we were going to do differently. We accepted that something had gone wrong. There was something that had impacted the culture in the building. There was an element of a loss of trust, I think, in what was being delivered in the school. And that really hurt. And to some extent, the early conversation about building capacity was really important. At the time, the trust was in a financially difficult position. So we weren't building capacity in the centre. We hadn't built that culture around everybody in it together that we've got now. And there was an element of looking from top to bottom right the way through the organisation of what did we get wrong here. And that happened the evening of day 2 with trustees. And in a meeting with trustees said, we've got to all look, every one of us, at what's gone wrong here. And I based myself in this building from that point forward. We moved the offer. We had a head office put in here. We didn't have a head office before. I just worked across all of the schools as and when. And we started to rebuild trust. And that was very clearly apologising immediately to the key stakeholders where we'd got that wrong and sharing with them what we were going to do to put that right. Enormously challenging 3 or 4 months. Working with that time between when you know internally that something's gone wrong and then people know externally. You've got a couple of months, particularly when it goes that wrong, you get a little bit longer time because of the moderation process through the Ofsted cycle. And in that time, I would say that by the time we hit month 2 and the inspection report came out, most of our closely linked stakeholders knew what was going on, although we hadn't told them the answer. And we were already putting things right. So by the time that report had landed, we'd already shifted an awful lot. And we'd already done consultation, we'd spoke to parents, we'd moved things forward. So personally, really difficult. That's one of those moments when you have to get stuck in as a CEO on the ground, working with the communities that you serve. And I think in a reflective position now, 3 years on, I could say that may well have been the single most important turning point for this multi-academy trust, because we talk a lot about learning from moments when things go wrong, and I think that has changed the view and the way in which, as a organisation, leadership and governance, we question, we review, we keep on touch, we quality assure, we ask ourselves the tough questions, we sense check, we triangulate everything. And it meant that we said, hold on a minute, chasing the finances all the time isn't the right answer, albeit we were under significant pressure to get the finances in a better place. Ironically, we were just coming out of that period of time. We were in a better place. And so we've started to build capacity around a deputy CEO for succession planning, who is the chief education officer, really focusing in on the quality and the review process. So I think, had that have not happened, I'm not sure our trust would be as strong as it is now, looking back on that whole journey.
So in hindsight, it might be looked at as a good thing. Probably not at the time. It didn't feel like that, I imagine.
I'd rather us have come to that conclusion in a different way.
Yes.
But sometimes when things go wrong, it's when you have those real deep conversations and really difficult, deep conversations that you say, never, ever again. Never again will that happen. And whilst that wasn't helpful for UTC Reading at the time, I think for a lot of people connected, they saw how we just rallied around each other and got it done for the community we were serving.
And important to say also that it's now judged good.
Yes,
in the latest Ofsted inspection.
Yep.
That was 2025.
It was
just over a year ago.
Yeah.
So it's a real sort of success story. And we see things that go well and go badly because our work as auditors. And the difference is the people that are, as Joe touched on, defensive, point the finger, try and deflect. Those are the ones where it doesn't turn around. It's probably bad for those leaders that have that attitude. Where there's an acceptance, a taking of responsibility, a shared sense of how can we learn from this. Quite often, and Joe's a great example of this, how Activate Learning is now a much stronger organisation and actually has got more resilience, I think, certainly in terms of your depth that you have across your operational senior leaders and than trusts that have 3 times the size of you because you've took a long-term approach to fixing it, not sticking plasters, but really getting to the root cause of the issues and learning from it in a what's the word, in a sustainable way that really builds for the future.
I think it's interesting as well. I mean, you mentioned culture, you mentioned trust as well. Obviously, you talked about the budget constraints and that perhaps finances weren't in the best position at the time. But there's also the energy side as well. And I think you kind of alluded to it. It feels like you're in the trenches a little bit. To find the energy to be able to do that, not just for yourself, but also for the team around you and keep their morale high. That must be really tough. That must be a huge challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a huge challenge, and working in leadership and education isn't the easiest job. I'm sure everybody in leadership in all sectors would say the same. But there is something about the communities. It's very public. People are watching to see what you're doing at every single move. And yes, that personal energy is really difficult to manage. And I think you've got to have a really good relationship with your trust board that can be critical and challenging, but when you decide what direction you're going to go in, you do it together. That enables any chief executive to be able to get on and do their job with the confidence and know what needs to be done. But of course, you're still a human being at the heart of all of it, and you still need to have a close team around you who can support you and notice when you're a bit down and pick you up. And that's what we did in that time. We brought some initial capacity in to support with that. And you need a good family. You need a good family background. You still need to be able to have the support at home, that understanding support, knowing when you're down and when you're up. And you still have to look after yourself. And you still need to have a hobby or something to help your mindfulness. And mine is playing golf, as many of my colleagues know. It's amazing how much relief you can get from feeling frustrated and down when you're out in the golf course in nature, trying to self-improve yourself out elsewhere other than in the workplace. So it's very challenging, but you have to put your own mask on, don't you, before you can help everybody else.
Yeah.
And I was really conscious of that. I was really fortunate that the Trust had invested quite heavily in coaching, executive coaching for me and members of the team prior to this happening. And I think that had I have not had that executive coaching before that, I think my response would have been different. And I wonder whether I would still be doing this role.
Interesting. Okay. Do you see that a lot then with the leaders? I mean, there are always going to be problems, as Joe said. It's really just how you react to them, perhaps, is the biggest thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way that I resolved these issues is that's why we wanted to have this podcast to talk to you about it, really, Joe. Because I remember it was about maybe 2 years ago, something like that, and you're speaking to any chief executive officer, they're always quite busy, and you have really good conversations, but there's a sense that there's something else that's got to be going on.
Yeah.
And do you remember I said, we're on Teams, I think, and I went, something's changed with you, Joe. She'd suddenly got this Zen-like quality of presence when you've got the director of learning involved. Yeah. And you said, I've got 2 days of strategic thinking now. And I think working at home was certainly a different environment. Changed the working environment, got my mind set for strategic thinking. And there's this, as I say, like almost Buddhist sort of stillness and calmness. And I think that's what a lot of leaders sometimes forget, because you're so busy. And as Joe said, you're a public role. You've got a lot of eyes on you. It's having that time to give yourself the space, because you're almost a chief executive. It's not a defined job role, is it? Really, it's like I do this on a Monday and a Tuesday. Every day is different. You get all sorts of things thrown at you, and it's really easy to go down a rabbit hole. And the thing that Joe said about right at the start of this was, "What's your hobby? What's your hobby this week, Joe?" Going in. That's the easy bit. Harder bit is getting out again, and not just carrying on. And that's something that I think that you've done really well here, because you have fixed things come out, you put the team in place, and you've got the capacity, as I say, that in sort of depth that you don't normally see at a trust of your size. That's why I wanted to talk to you and say, how do you bottle that then?
Well, yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, going sort of into the detail, I guess, really, of that 2023 report, it raised issues about behaviour, safeguarding confidence, SEND support, curriculum consistency and attendance. Now, I think you talked about sort of culture and repairing trust and apologising. But when you're sort of delving deeper, those are big issues.
Mm-hmm.
Do you go, right, I'm going to take one at a time, or is it all of them? How do you even approach that?
Well, all of them, I suppose. We made sure that we had the right staff and the right leaders in place that were able to take the school to the position we needed to get it to. We happened to have who was the deputy here originally when it opened, had been over at UTC Heathrow, and believe it or not, at the same period was inspected in the same 2 days. And he'd moved that school to good. And he then came back over here, knowing the school and the community really well, and supported the leadership here. But my role was completely around rebuilding stakeholders' trust. That was what I saw was important to me. I held public consultations with parents. We worked with our director of SEND, met with parents. We talked to, we went to find the parents who were the most vocal in those key groups. And we said, talk to us. What is it? Become part of this solution with us. So we took people with us. We deliberately looked at culture, behaviours, systems, and we took people with us on the journey. But we did deliberately look for people who were almost the ones who were saying, see, I told you so, you haven't got this quite right yet, have you? Right. So, right, come and help us do this then. Because this is really important.
Those are tough conversations, because it must be very easy to lock yourself in your office and go, I'm just going to try and stay away from that. But you've kind of faced it head on, because those aren't necessarily nice conversations or nice things to hear, are they really?
No, they're not. And there's an element of you can just say, we're sorry and accept it and think, oh, I've done the sorry and accept it and everybody let it go. But you've got to back it up with action. And that was really tough. It was hard. But the one thing that I was conscious of is I wasn't going to ask any leaders in the school to face that public stakeholder scrutiny. They needed to be able to focus on the task at hand in getting things better in the building. And I would face the public scrutiny. I was a chief executive. I was very responsible for what went wrong here. I took my eye off the ball, as did other people, not just me.
Sure.
But my job in that role is to have the broad shoulders and take that to enable the leaders in the building to be able to do what they needed to do for the children.
Yeah, I suppose at the end of the day, it's your name above the door, isn't it, really? So, yeah, okay. And as Chris said, you've moved to good now in 2025, which must be a huge feeling of pride. Is that the right word?
Yeah, and you know what? The huge feeling of pride is by the time we got to the point that we were being re-inspected, I wasn't visible in the building. I'd done the piece I needed to do, and then empowered leaders and the school leaders and the staff in the building. And not just the staff leaders, but the student leadership board were incredibly impressive as part of that change process from 23 to 25. So actually, when it came to the inspection, I no longer knew the detail that I knew in the first 6 months. The first 6 months was very heavy involvement, and then that was fine. But if I didn't then work out how I pulled out of it, I would stay heavily involved in one school, and then the chances are this could happen in one of our other schools somewhere else.
Yeah, that's the tough thing. You're sort of spinning all these plates, aren't you, basically? And to keep your eye on that one and, here we are again. Yeah, okay.
As a CFO, that's the thing I've struggled with, is coming out when there was a problem. I mean, well done for doing what you do, but I find that bit really tricky. You get in there and it was almost like you're pointing a fire extinguisher at different problems. So you're in one fixing it, and then something else is blowing up over here. It's really easy to get caught in that trap. And there's so many MATs, including clients of ours, that have had the Ofsted that's shocked them, the outstanding, that they're focusing on the ones that requires improvement. The flagship score goes to requires improvement or inadequate. And the whole reputation is built on that one flagship. The first school that became MAT from. Yeah, so it does happen, but again, it's how you react to it, isn't it?
And how you build a team around you. Having a team around you that you have built the confidence in them to be able to say, hold on a minute, Joe, this has gone too far, or you've got to get out of this now. Let me take this now. Having people who are brave enough to challenge the me is just a human being, but the role I hold,
Sure.
empowering people to be able to do that and giving permission to do that has been a really important part of the journey also.
We've touched on finances. That's kind of come up a few times, but we haven't really delved too deeply into it. So trust finances, another form of kind of leadership capacity, really, aren't they? How do you make sure financial planning supports school improvement rather than becoming, I don't know, a separate sort of central office exercise? And I mean, I think we always accept, and this is a theme that comes up a lot, it's always going to be a challenge, isn't it, in the world we live in? So yeah, talk us through that.
Well, I think a lot of that comes from the culture we've created, head teachers feeling that they have ownership of and empowered for their communities to deliver, but part of the bigger picture. All of our management accounts, all of our budget processing is completely transparent across our head teachers. They're involved in it. And if we do the first stage of the integrated financial planning process, and we're not quite where we need to be as an organisation, we get around the table with all of the heads and we say, right, what are we going to do about it? And every head looks back into their budget and says, well, this is the contribution I can make. These are the changes that I can make. But effectively, we say to every head teacher at the start of every year, very early on in the financial year, let's now start to think about the curriculum for 27. What's the staffing of that going to need to be? What are your priorities in your academy improvement plan? Where do we need to put some additional funding? What's the nice to haves? What's the one thing? Because we always say you can have anything you want, you just can't have it all. So prioritising is incredibly important. So we start off with the curriculum model. We then put the finances into it, rather than having the finances into it and you're looking for a target. So we do it very much from what's it look like. We benchmark all of the key metrics across all our schools and then use the DFE external benchmarks. And then we challenge and ask questions on that and go around individual one-on-one conversations about, well, let's go through your staffing model, let's go through your curriculum model. So that school there is able to do that more efficiently than you are. What can we learn from each other? So it's a complete shared role. It's a shared leadership battle. I think it is, frankly.
Yeah.
Nobody would say that in the public sector we have more money than we need. So it is a shared battle. But we have to make sure that we deliver our core service, which is to the children in every school. So where we find that we've got to save money, and I hope our head teachers would say the same, is we've led by example in the central team, and we've cut our cloth in the central team, and we've tried to get the central team to be more efficient and use capacity across the entire trust to deliver on activities and priorities.
So are those working groups with all the head teachers within the same group talking about the challenges, financial challenges across the whole trust?
Absolutely, yeah. The head teachers know they have a budget. They're the head of their budget.
Brilliant.
And the school improvement team, which includes the head teachers, receive the trust management accounts and they see everybody's monthly financial position.
I think it's so important because quite often we see this. We've worked, going back a few years now, a very big trust which I won't name, but you've got some head teachers that are allowing their deficits to increase because they want to turn around from requires improvement to something else. And what actually they're doing, and in some trusts that are run that way, that there's not that because of the size or because of the culture or whatever, there's not that round the table understanding of everyone's challenges. So what you end up doing is effectively they're spending another school's money to be able to turn theirs around, which is going to affect someone else. And I think it's really important to have that effective one organisation. It's so important to be able to have that open, transparent conversation about finance. It's not just in silos.
It shows a real level of maturity of leadership when your head teachers can come to a table and say, this is my budget, I need to look after this. But actually, I can make some savings here, which will really make a difference there. And that school really needs it right now. Because technically, and I know there's lots of schools say we're a family of schools in a trust. And we are, but we're also a business organisation. It feels really weird when you say business and education. We're in the business of education, aren't we? And we still have to run our finances like any company anywhere in this country and wider. But the heads are acutely aware of when one of our schools is in a challenging position. And we talk about how we're going to over-support that in a particular way with a particular resource. And that's accepted because they need it. Can't be forever, but it is because you need this right now. And in our strategic plan, equity is a really high-level lever that we have in our strategic plan. And that very much is the same for children. These children need more because this particular area or department needs more because in one of our schools, we hit a point where we're thinking, well, we can't have a leadership team any bigger, but the school can't get better without a leadership team to deliver it. So we invested in an additional leadership post in that structure, and it has really paid dividends. They will in time get much better results. The community will come, their numbers on roll will go up, and that will pay it back. But you have to take the longer term view.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, just to round up, I thank you, Joe, for just being so open and telling us exactly what happened with obviously a really difficult time for you. And for other MAT leaders who are listening at the moment, what kind of lessons, and you've shared quite a lot already, would you talk about in terms of building resilient leadership capacity, perhaps before a crisis happens, because nobody wants to get to that point. I know it helped in terms of rebuilding to where you are now, but ideally you kind of go, wouldn't it be great if we don't have to do that in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite difficult, isn't it? 'Cause it's like your parents telling you how to do something, and then you realise you've got to go and find out how to do it yourself. But I suppose the big learning point from me was getting that executive coaching, taking time for myself and giving myself time to think, ensuring that I had leaders around me who would challenge, and above all, ensuring that I had a trust board that would challenge, accept joint responsibility, work together to solve problems. And so all of the time that I put in prior to that on working with our trust board and chair, then in a time of crisis, that pays dividends. So I would, really strongly say it's all about teamwork and working with people. And that trust board is a really important team that you need to be part of and working to be able to stand the test of time when something doesn't go so well.
I think it's also support from the trust board as well. It's challenge, but it's also support because we see this. Well-being is so important in an organisation. The CEO's head, if you like, of well-being for the organisations. Who's in charge of the head of the CEO's well-being? Quite often you're just getting challenged from trustees, actually checking in on the CEO and taking a little bit of the, giving the support and helping that well-being of the chief exec. Have they got capacity? Do they need some extra support? I think it is useful. Look, obviously the main thing for trustees is challenge, but they're there to support as well, I think. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, nothing more supportive than when my trust board said, we all have to look from top to bottom at what didn't go well here, and then we got around a plan. There could have been nothing more supportive for my well-being, professional responsibilities than a trust board who said, we're with you on this. We trust you to get us through this. Nothing can be more supportive than that.
Really strong point to leave it on. Joe, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the MAT Unpacked. If you found it useful, please subscribe or follow the show and share it with a colleague in your trust. And if you want a specialist partner to strengthen your assurance, improve your risk management, and give your board real confidence, speak to the team at Academy Advisory. You'll find us on LinkedIn or visit our website, academyadvisory.com.